It's funny actually because when you live in Nigeria, you want to escape Nigeria, but it's still
Mm.
shocking to finally escape the Nigeria and now find out that nobody has heard of Nigeria.
Welcome to Third Culture Africans, the lifestyle podcast for dreamers, thinkers, and doers. We celebrate artistry, share stories from those brave enough to create something and succeed, listen to diverse perspectives on African success, and those shifting the needle on culture. I'm Zeze Oriaki Sao, your host. On this week's episode of Third Culture Africans, my guest is Chibundu Onuzo, who started writing at 10 and wrote the award-winning book Welcome to Lagos. She is an outspoken character who's not afraid to use her voice and her words to express herself and also for causes that she believes in. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did sitting with Chibundu to discuss her career as an author. Well, thank you, Chibundu, for joining us on this week's episode of Third Culture Africans.
Thank you for having me.
You are, I would say, my first professional author on the show. And I've always found authors interesting because being able to create magical words or storytell in a way that allows people to be transported into, I would say, an alternative reality is incredible. Or even just being able to craft out characters that people are able to somehow find themselves in, and with the use of words is beautiful. So I'm excited for this episode. I think your story is important. I think your story is also beautiful. And I think at the time like this, it gives hopefully a lot of hope to anyone who isn't sure of where they should be. And you speak beautifully and inspirationally. So I'm excited to dig deep. I've got here you're an author, also a doctor because you hold a PhD,
Mm-hmm.
but you're an author of literary fiction. Wrote your first book at 17.
Well, started it.
Started at 17.
Yes,
Published at.
21.
Wow. And I've also got here you are a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and 40 under 40.
Yes, correct.
Amazing. I guess to dig deep or just dive into early days, how do you become an author who starts writing their first book at 17, publishes at 21, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature?
So the Spider Kings also wasn't my first book. So it was my first book that was published. But I started writing my first novel when I was 10. And
Oh,
I
wow.
was serious about it. So, I mean, I grew up in Nigeria, grew up in Lagos. And I suppose it's something we can discuss further along in the episode. But I don't know that I really see myself. I really enjoy your podcast. I listen to it. But I don't know if I see myself as a
Thank you.
third culture African. I just am
Okay.
an African. My no
Okay. But
full
you're a
stop.
third culture kid. You moved to the UK at 14.
No, but I'm not. Yeah, but like I feel like my roots are. My parents live in Nigeria. So like it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. It didn't feel like I was completely transplanted. It didn't feel like we moved here and we sort of waved bye bye to
Mm.
Nigeria. Because especially sort of when you go to boarding school here, we had a family home here, but often you would also spend holidays in Nigeria, and so it
Mm.
was like school was school, and then home was still very much present. It wasn't like I
Home.
waved bye bye
Yeah.
to Nigeria
Which I
totally.
think is true for all my
Mm.
guests, I think. I think the fact that you are multi-identity though, because in the context of Nigeria, there's a lot of being Nigerian that you're probably not in tune with, and perhaps more in tune with being in the UK.
Mm, I suppose maybe it's like a grudging acceptance, you know. I mean, I'm Nigerian, because sometimes you have conversations with people and they'll ask you where are you
Where are you from?
originally from. So now
Loaded
it
question,
so,
that
so, it, so
question.
it depends on who is asking the question. So if the person who is asking the question is a certain degree of woke, they will now realize that, oh, you're not supposed to ask that question, and they say, oh, I'm so sorry, or they will now start feeling somehow for asking me. And then me, but I'm Nigerian, sha. Like you can hear it even in the way I speak that I'm not
Yeah.
originally from England.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, but I don't like it when it just depends on the person that is asking.
Yeah, but
but I'm always
that
a
is the
Nigerian.
point. The fact that it depends on the person and the context of the question is what makes you a third culture kid. And you just happen
No,
to be African.
I refuse. You carry your third culture with yourself. Me, I already have more than enough cultures. My father is Igbo, my mother is Yoruba,
Okay,
and I was born and raised in Lagos,
fabulous.
and I consider myself a Lagosian. So that means my three cultures are already full before I have left.
So, this podcast is sponsored by Malay Natural Science. Malay's products are inspired by the rich landscapes, alluring scents, and ancient wisdom of Africa. Their luxurious fragrance and body care range balances 100% natural active ingredients and scientifically proven formulas to heal, protect, and pamper your skin. Malay ships worldwide, and you can buy their products at maleeonline.com. They also offer a free sample if you'd like to try. So what happens to Chibundu from 14 till now?
What happens to her?
Yeah, who's lived in the UK?
She stayed here for 10 years.
Formative years in those 10 years.
Yes, formative years. Yes, Her Majesty's government gave her residency, thank God. And then Her Majesty's government gave her a British passport. So I'm sort of now beginning to
Begrudgingly
feel that.
accepting it.
No, I didn't begrudgingly accept it. So do you know what it is to travel without a visa? Hey, goodness gracious. That is a testimony for another day. I did not. I said thank you very much. And sort of like I sort of beginning to come to terms with kind of accepting that I'm also Black British, I suppose. Whatever, and then sort of figuring
Yeah.
that out. So maybe, but I and the thing
I
is,
think that
anyway,
the discussion around identity, though, is important because I had someone on our Instagram ask a question. And perhaps maybe this is a question that you are asking, and also we are navigating, right? And it
hmm,
was, hey, I don't think I'm a third culture African in the same way that you've mentioned it. But what makes or what is a third culture African? And the name wasn't meant to be political in any way when I came up with it, but it was very much that multi identitied Africans who have had exposure to other parts of the world, even other African countries, seems to be creating within them a sense or ability to create in such a way that they are shifting the needle on our culture, also exposing the possibilities in, I guess, other careers, and being able to do it in such a way that it's purposeful and also giving back, if that makes sense. And I just drew a correlation between, hey, here's a list of people that would be considered successful in what they're doing outside of your traditional, I'm a banker, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, but who have really gone out and carved something new that has gotten the world to look at Africa and also look at Africa through a different lens to what we're used to seeing in mainstream culture, whether that's poverty or economic instability or fluctuations, etc., etc. And for the first time, these people are creating businesses or careers or sharing their gifts in a way that people then get to look at it through our eyes, or eyes of someone who has a fondness, a love, a passion, a connection for the part of the continent that they come from. And it was just the concept of a third culture kid and realizing that these are all third culture kids who happen to be African. And the name was in no way supposed to be political. But it's interesting that it does pull up a larger question around identity, and it doesn't single out anyone. We have multi-identity Africans, right? You've just pointed out by virtue of having your parents be from two different tribes, you are already a third culture kid. Your dad is Igbo, your mom's Yoruba, and you grew up in Lagos. That makes you a third culture kid.
I guess for me, where I halt with the word is the same sort of issue that I have with the word Afropolitan because of the way that it intersects with class. So I'm not saying that obviously me traveling outside of Nigeria hasn't influenced me. Of course, in all our experiences, they influence us. But am I saying that if I had remained in Nigeria, I wouldn't have had something to say, I wouldn't have also had the innovation or come up with the ideas to also shape culture or to affect culture or just to be innovative. Like, I don't want to tie my innovation to the fact that, I came to the West. Because as you said, there are multiple cultural experiences that you can have within Nigeria,
Hmm.
within Lagos for that matter.
Or even within Africa alone, that makes you a third culture kid.
Mm,
So it was a lady I had Elvira ask, I love your purpose. I'm wondering, what do you mean by third culture Africans? How do they differentiate from normal ones?
mm.
In the same way that you're saying it, right? And I guess to answer your question, Elvira, hopefully this part of Chibundu's and I's discussion around identity and what that means has given some insight into the thought process. But in no way is it meant to be exclusionary, because I think even within Africa itself, if you've never crossed the borders or left, there is a large percentage of the population that by default are third culture kids. You have parents from two different tribes, or your parents are from a different tribe, but you grew up in a different city. I think there's enough movement within Africa, or even within our
Mm,
countries, within cities or states, that it is quite a common thing. And usually, when you have a reference point of a difference, I think it does create an environment for you to question and want to add value, though, because then you're less complacent.
mm.
You wrote Welcome to Lagos being in the UK.
Yes, I wrote it in England. I wrote some of it in England, but I also wrote some of it in Nigeria, in Lagos, in the Lagos of the title. But okay, I'm not trying to. It's just an interesting discussion. I like the
No, but
title.
I'm loving it. I'm loving
Mm-hmm.
it because it's something that, as I said, Elvira's asked, is something we get asked on social media. And I love the fact that with you, we've been able to discuss that in a little bit more detail. I guess we all struggle with what parts of our identities, because in certain rooms, as you say, depending on who asks and what the context is and how woke they are, in inverted commas, it that dictates your answer. The fact that it's not one consistent answer in itself lends itself to the idea of what I'm saying. But to go back to your writing, you are a successful literary fiction author, and your first book put you on the map, if I'm right in saying that.
Well, it depends whose map you are using, but on some people's map, yes.
Well, you had a publisher, so you weren't self publishing. And that in today's world is a huge achievement, given that there's enough self publishing platforms and avenues for any budding writer to go down. Was it a conscious choice for you to, I don't want to say formalize your writing by going down the publishing route, but why the choice to publish as opposed to, or go down the publishing route as opposed to self publish?
I mean, I got my contract when I was 19, sort of 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think e readers existed then, but really, sort of self publishing wasn't something that I thought of because most of the books that at the time, anyway, you see in Waterstones, W.H. Smith, they're not self published. They've gone the traditional publishing route. So just figuring out or reading about how books got from laptops to stores. Most of the
Mm,
accounts that I read of that process said first you get an agent, then you get an editor, hopefully, and then your publisher
mm,
distributes your book. And so there was a book called The Writers and Artists Yearbook, which is published every year,
mm.
which my sister bought for me when I was around maybe 13 or 14 or something. I think she bought it for me when I came to England because she knew that I was a writer and I had a lot of family encouragement. And Helen Oyeyemi was used as my used as somebody I should aspire to. So Helen Oyeyemi, I think, signed her contract when she was 17 or 18. And so my sister, in that sort of Nigerian motivational style, was like, look at Helen Oyeyemi. Does she have two heads? She's a writer and she's a teenager and she got a book deal. So you can get a book deal. So here is this book called The Right Artist Yearbook that is going to show you how to get the things that you write and we say are so good, how to get
Yeah.
them from your laptop or from your notebook, and how to get them into a bookstore. So she bought me this book,
Mm,
and I went through and circled all the agents that I thought sounded interesting. So how the book worked was it would
mm,
show you, it would write down the authors that the agents represented, And so any author's name
Mm.
that I recognized, I would circle that agency as one that was of interest. And so I actually
Mm.
sent my first query letter to an agent. Again, when I was 14 or 15, I can't remember how old I was, but I was still a teenager and I hadn't reached my A level. So it was one of my years of GCSE. And I got my first rejection slip and it was terrible. And I was like, oh my gosh, they rejected me. And I was like, I'm going to keep it forever and show it when I finally get published. Of course, I didn't keep it for longer than, I don't know, 2 weeks. I don't know where that seminar rejection, I don't know where that seminar rejection slip is now. But yes, I mean, I started the process when I was quite young. And I always encourage people and especially parents, like, let your children start pursuing what they want to do as young as possible, especially if it's something creative, because you can take those losses more easily when you're 18,
I think so. You
when you're
forget them.
21.
You forget them. You
Yeah,
forget them a
yeah,
lot quicker.
you know.
But then how do you go from that and then continue with formal education, right? You get your degree in history and then a master's in public policy. In between writing these two books with a publisher and agent and a career and an income.
I don't know. I mean, I just did. Like, so, I mean, so I signed my contract when I was 19. So I was in my first year of university. And my novel came out
Mm-hmm.
when I was 21. So I was in my final year. And there wasn't
Mm-hmm.
a sort of dropping out of school when I signed my contract. A, because I wouldn't have been able to remain in the UK if I'd done that. I was here on a student visa. But also because
Mm.
B, like, it's not as if they paid me £5 million in advance. Like, it was a nice sum of money, but then it's given to you in installments, and by the time it's broken up into installments over X amount of years, it's below minimum wage. It wasn't like, okay, now I'm going to buy my island in the Caribbean or something. So I knew that I definitely wanted to eventually end up making my living from writing and to write full time. But it wasn't like at
Yes.
19, it was like, okay, mom and dad, I'm going to buy you a house in Ikoyi, you know, and
Mm.
everybody can retire in the family. So yeah, I mean, I still went to school. I remember in my first year, I got a low 2-1. And then I was like,
Mm.
no, I came to university to get it first. And I did. I got it first at the end of university. It was
Well
just sort
done.
of thank you, what I wanted to do. So I did it. I wanted to publish a novel. I didn't tell a lot of my friends. I remember sort of like keeping it a bit to myself. And I then remember one of my friends saying, then she'd seen some press. I didn't know I was on CNN. I was somewhere on BBC. I was on something. And so she'd seen some press about my novel. And she's like, what do you mean you've written a novel? And I was like, yeah, I've written a novel. Yeah. That's what Nigerians do. Yeah. Yes, that's what we do. We write novels and then we carry the first class because we have two heads. And also because we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Amen.
But the reality is that's enormous pressure, right? It requires a level of focus, it requires a level of dedication to execute. How did you go about finding your path, though, through navigating what is adolescence, becoming a young adult, achieving a degree, writing a book? All of these things are living within a very short space of time for you.
Okay, so let's rewind. So I grew up in Lagos. I was born in
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria in 1991. Had a really, really happy childhood. So both my parents are doctors. Went to Corona Bagada, the center of excellence. Every other Corona is a waste and a disgrace.
Every
Okay, the only Corona you want to go to is Corona Bagada. I said it. All the rest of them, they are fake. So I really enjoyed my time there. Mr. Annan. There's a lot of music, so I'm very musical. I play the piano, and so like we were encouraged to pursue our interests. So nothing was ever by force, except school. Like you had to pass, but like we had piano lessons and swimming lessons and tennis lessons, and there was no lesson my mother saw that she didn't want to say, why don't you try this? I remember I signed up for some like ballet, or like some very fake ballet that no ballerinas in Europe would ever recognize as ballet, but we also went and signed up for that ballet. So like sometimes when people see a lot of the interest that I have continued to pursue into adulthood. It seems like I do a lot because I play the piano, I sing, but I'm like, trust me, I tried my hand at a lot of other things before I narrowed it
Growing
down.
up, you did a lot. Yeah. Yeah. I
Exactly.
think the same. I think, oh goodness, we did a whole bunch of things. So I think for me, the experience, for a large part, if you were from a middle class background that allowed you the opportunities to develop new skills and learn more. By and large, I think most of our parents gave you as many opportunities as you could, from brownies, Girl Scouts. You did it all. You had a packed calendar and you were actually so busy. I remember now, I'm now a mother, and my first instinct, my daughter started going to play groups at like 3 months. And then one day I woke up and I asked myself, but why am I stressing myself trying to get out the house to make these classes like they're prescribed, right? They're
Hmm,
mandatory. And I think I realized that it had a lot to do with my own upbringing and the fact that
hmm,
actually extracurricular activities was a part of life. My dad played tennis, he had
hmm,
hobbies. My mom was very creative. So, in order to do those things consistently, even in my own life, wasn't foreign, and to be able to pass that on. So just to echo your sentiment around fake ballet, piano,
yeah, fake.
karate, taekwondo.
So yeah, so there was that, and so there were always a lot of books in the house, and so I read a
Mm,
lot from a very young age. So my mom usually bought the books, and it was the books that she had read in her childhood, and so because she had a colonial education, it was a lot of Austen, Dickens, David Copperfield, Anne of Green Gables, Enid Blyton, Mallory Towers, all that sort of stuff. That's the only sort of deficit I would say. And I mean, my parents did their best. I went to my village every year. I certainly knew I was Nigerian. But, something happens when you grow up in that sort of very middle class Nigerian or professional family sort of thing, where you start imbibing that Western things are the interesting things, are the sweet things. So, a lot of the television that we watched was American. And there was just always this idea of always wanting to go abroad. And like I remember, like even when we came to England for holidays or we came to America for holidays, when it was time to go back home, and they started doing all the back to school adverts for sort of the British children or the American children. I'd be telling my mom, I don't want to go back to Nigeria. No, I want to stay and be eating, I don't know, Doritos and walk at
yeah,
McDonald's or
yeah.
whatever.
Not Marie biscuits or cabin biscuits.
Exactly. So yeah, there was that very creative environment, but also in some ways looking, especially when it came to creativity, looking to seeing Western products as what was sort of like the standard. So my first novel that I started when I was 10, and I started it sort of very seriously, went to the family computer, opened my Microsoft Word document, and I mean I'm the youngest in my family, and we had a lot of cousins living with us. But sort of when Chibundu was writing her novel, nobody could ask me to get up from the computer because this was a very legitimate, serious pursuit. But this first novel that I began was set in America with white American children, and I don't know what they were getting up to, Brad and Chuck or whoever. And I remember my mom reading it and sort of, I guess she must have been a bit alarmed because they hadn't done anything. Because we lived in Nigeria, I guess they didn't feel they had to tell us that black is beautiful and black is good. And so to see her 10-year-old daughter writing this novel completely populated by white people. And I remember her telling me, why don't you consider writing about what you know? And I was aghast. I should write
Mm.
about what I know. I should write about Madame Coin Coin. Write about that's not for books, write about Sojo Elegba, write about Bagada. Like
Yeah.
that's not interesting. Interesting is Brad
Mm.
and Chuck, I don't know, Pennsylvania or
Yeah.
wherever the book was
Perspective,
set.
right?
And so there was so I was always writing from primary school, went to secondary school in Atlantic Hall. And I would say Atlantic Hall was great for many things. I was a boarder. Atlantic Hall was great for many things, but it was not great for my creative life. You know how it is, like you're sort of 13, 12, 13, 14, and then everybody is like who is hard and who is Raz and who is cool and who is not cool and who got a Valentine's gift. So I think my first year as a day student in Atlantico, creatively I was still sort of on track. But then
Mm.
my GS2 and GS3 when I became a full boarder. Like creatively, I was drilled into sort of being a teenager and caring about how fresh you are and who
Mm.
is not fresh. And I think perhaps if I'd stayed in Atlantico till I finished, maybe I'd have been published later because I would have been caught up in all the hard and raz. And we were so superficial and so materialistic. I mean, I had a show at the
Mm.
South Bank called 1991, which was autobiographical. And I wrote about some of my
Mm.
Atlantical experiences, which included like, always, who travels for summer? Where did you travel?
Mm.
If
Oh
you didn't go to
yeah. Oh
America, if
yeah.
you didn't go
Mm.
to England, like, God forbid you went to Ghana. Ghana is not a holiday destination. That's like just go to your village rather than go to Ghana. And or like where are your trainers from and are your trainers Nike
Mm.
and all that sort of rubbish, and checking to see whose stuff was fake or whose stuff was Abba made. And there's nothing wrong with Aba. Like Aba is actually a place where they actually manufacture things in Nigeria. But again, it was a colonial mentality, like that had passed down and passed down. Even though I didn't have any direct experience of colonialism, just it seeped down this idea of Western as better. So, anyways, when I reached the age of 14, finally I got my wish. My sister was graduating from Atlantic Hall, and my mother decided because they had us in pairs. We were four. I have two siblings who are much older than me, and then it's me and my sister. So
Mhm.
there's like an 11-year gap between me and the oldest. So my oldest brother and sister went to England around the same time. And so me and my sister finished SS3. I was in GS3. So it was just like, okay, she'll go to England to start A levels, and I'll go to England to start GCSEs. We went to a school in Winchester, the same boarding school that my mother went to. So that's sort of a connection to the place. And we
Mm.
arrived there, and you were like, the only black people. There were like maybe one other black person apart from us. It's funny actually because when you live in Nigeria, you want to escape Nigeria, but it's still
Mm.
shocking to finally escape the Nigeria and now find out that nobody has heard of Nigeria. Because you think, how can you not even, this is in South America, they were surprised by English and that we spoke English. And I was like, okay, you
You
two, your own
spoke
English,
well. Yeah. What
your
do you
own
guys
English.
speak? And like, yeah.
Mm. I said, your own English is very good
Mm.
too. Congrats. Since
Yeah.
we are complimenting each other on our English speaking abilities. I said, I was speaking English before you were born. First aid in English, a stitch in time saves nine. Nonsense and ingredients. So we sort of arrived there. And so the interesting thing was, so again, I've been writing all this time. It was only when I moved to England that I started setting my fiction in Nigeria. Because, like, and the things they would ask, they had a very fixed perception of what Africa should be. So, sort of ironically, shortly after we arrived, we had something called Africa Week in my boarding school where they were raising funds for, Africans. I don't like to put a tone when I say this because I mean it was very worthy and laudable work. Yeah, they raised funds for causes that needed them. But you can raise funds for something and not feel so superior in your fundraising and not sort of feel like you're better than the cultures that you are interacting with. Anyways, so they were doing a lot of girls were doing presentations on African countries, and so because I was in I had arrived, some people decided to switch their presentations from like Kenya and Tanzania to Nigeria as a sort of, I don't know, special favor to me or something. I don't know what their thinking behind this was. And so I remember one girl coming to interview me to find out what was sort of interesting about Nigeria for her presentation. And she had originally chosen Kenya as her country of interest. And so she had planned on her presentation being safari themed. And so she comes to me and says, okay, so I want to do my presentation based on like sort of like the animals, like the wildlife in Nigeria. I'm like, okay, good, good. And she's like, okay, so you have elephants in Nigeria. So I now know that we actually do have elephants in Nigeria. There's a West African elephant, but at this time, we did not have elephants in Lagos, anyways. Except we do even have a zoo in Lagos, So I'm like, no, we don't have elephants. And so she's like, oh, do you have lions? There's a West African lion. Didn't know this at the time. No, we don't have lions. Do you have rhinoceroses? And so she just goes through this list of animals like she's planning the itinerary for Noah's Ark. And she keeps going through. Do you have, I don't know, meerkats and warthogs? I don't know, the Lion King. And so she gets to the end of her list, and I'm like, okay, maybe just monkeys is what we have. And she's like, you don't have all these animals. So what do you have? And at that age, obviously, I didn't know what to respond to such a question. Like now as an
Mm.
adult, I'm like, what kind of stupid question is that? What do you mean? What do we have? We have people, we have cities, we have
Hmm.
airports, we have
Yeah.
we have music. There's so much that we have, but because you can only
Mm.
perceive of Africa through this very narrow lens, then we don't have anything because we don't have space for your safari, or we don't have space for you to project your own sort of very restricted narrative. And so yes, I had all these sort of interactions in boarding school that only as an adult, I can fully sort of process. And I continue to come across and run up with this thinking even after sort of I became a published author. So I would say this for my school. I'm in Winchester, St. Swithins. It was an excellent education, and I had access to a library for the first time, like a really, really good library. My parents had always bought books for me, but generally, like the library at St. Swithins, I read Things Fall Apart for the first time in St. Swithins, read, a lot of other African authors, and it was a very well stocked library. And my teachers also encouraged me a lot. Sort of, they always said I was a great writer. And yeah, none of them were particularly surprised when, I guess, maybe months after I'd left, maybe about 6 months after I'd left St. Swithins, I signed my contract with Faber and Faber. So my teachers were excellent. But then there were all these sort of interactions sort of with girls. There were a couple of incidents of racism. I've gotten this out of my system. I did this show at the South Bank. So yeah, one or sort of two usage of the N word around me, not directed at me, but sort of around me. And again, coming from Nigeria, that word just did not have the same historical significance for me. It did not have the same weight. I knew it was a bad word that they shouldn't be using, but it wasn't as if it was a word that I felt I had any claim to. So there were all these sort of incidences, and I would say that my immediate feeling when I left the school was positive,
Hmm.
and then I sort of quote unquote became more woke, and then my feeling was very negative, very negative, and I thought this was completely unacceptable. How could this have happened? Why were they so ignorant? Sort of very negative.
Yeah.
And then sort of now I feel sort of I can say, okay, there were really good things that happened. There were bad things that happened too. And I'm sort of maybe more neutral towards the experience, more neutral, veering again towards the positive.
But does that then push you to direct your work towards how do I create conversation that reduces this level of ignorance?
Ah, no. All the money that the government in the UK is investing in education in this country, it's not me that is going to be writing books to reduce ignorance. I am not the Minister of Education. And also, just as a writer, like that sort of didactic burden, I didn't want to take it upon myself because, I want my own creative freedom to express whatever is uppermost on my mind. And
Mm.
yes, it's sort of like, you just need to be better educated because, I didn't watch, I don't know, some BBC panorama expose on gangs of London and say that that is all that exists in England. Don't watch, I don't know, a documentary about a famine in an African country and then, I don't know, come and be leaving biscuits for me when you see me because you watched this documentary on, like sort of use your education. So no, I definitely don't take that upon myself. If you want to be ignorant, but like the cost of your ignorance keep rising in an increasingly globalized world.
But then that then takes you into young adulthood, and then you're thinking, I would love to write a book, like a formal book that I will publish.
I've been trying to write books from that age of 10. So I had many sort of writing directed at publishing from about 14. I always tell people who want to write that no, none of your past efforts are wasted. So if that
Mm.
one didn't work out, it's all training, it's all practice for sort of the eventual project that will work out, as long as you don't give up. And so, like the Spider King's daughter, the main protagonist is from a wealthy family, Abike, and then the other main character is a street hawker. And I
Mm.
suppose I look at sort of inequalities in the city through their friendship and sort of through the relationship that they strike up. And these are things that
Mm.
have always interested me or that I've always been aware of since I've been a child. And I remember my mother entered me for an essay competition, of course, and the topic was child labor. And when I was either in primary six or GS1, so quite young, I interviewed a street hawker about her experiences. She was a minor about being a hawker. And it was only after I finished the book that I realized that the inspiration, the idea must have come from that interview in some way, shape, or form. Like it's not sort of like a direct line that I finished the interview and said, right, I'm going to write a book about hawkers in Lagos. But
But it stuck with you. And I think this is something that's clear growing up in Africa or still being tied to Africa as Africans. I think in the way that I conduct my business, and I think by and large, for anyone who has the level of empathy to understand that, you are where you are, and it's a lottery, right? You could have been born to illiterate parents. One in a billion chance you were born to your parents who had the opportunities they had to give you the opportunities you have. I guess the capitalist nature of Nigeria, it becomes something, or most African countries, or even the world, then becomes stark and clearer as you get older. And then I guess the question is, what part do you play in that? And in your writing, you touch on, I guess, aspects of the Biafran War, or even just economic differences, class systems, looking at opportunities in a different way that perhaps takes the reader to a place from a very empathetic perspective that then focuses on the relationships more so that these characters are having. And I find that beautiful because, in a way, for the first time, you are said to be redefining African literature, and you earned the title of the youngest female writer with a publisher as a result of that.
so with my particular publisher, so with Faber and Faber, which I think they've been going for about maybe 90 years. They're pretty old anyway. They're pretty established. And so yes, when I was 19, when I signed my contract, I was the youngest woman to ever have signed with them. I don't know if somebody else has taken my crown. I haven't been following. I haven't been following, but at the time,
Yeah.
as at 10 years ago, yes.
They say we're the sum of all of our experiences, right? And I think in your work, it clearly shows the aspects of society that you question. And you question these openly anyway. You have always used your voice on the platforms that you are given. So whether that's BBC or TEDx or even your social media, and to have conversations around issues that I guess reach further than what you write about. Now you're obviously in the middle of writing book number 3. You're now a professional author, so this is now your full-time job. You're no longer
Yes.
lecturing, you're not studying, and all you do now is full-time writing. You've also written for TV recently, or for the big screen with Dolapo is Fine.
Yes, I have actually. Yes, short
Did you
film.
forget
Yes,
that?
I did. I did. I was thinking, what are you talking
Oh
about? I was
dear.
like, oh yes, okay, it's true. I did.
Yeah, with Dolapo is Fine. How was that experience? Seeing your words on a screen.
It was great, actually. It's great to see it translated. And it's not exactly as it was in the text, but I mean, I've listened to interviews of other sort of authors who've had their work transferred to screen. Something they always say is that you need to let go of the original thing you wrote, and which, because the original for me was a short story, and see it as a sort of like creative translation into another medium. Because film is different.
When you write, do you visualize? Do you visualize your characters? Do they have faces, hairstyles, outfits? Do you go as far as that in your process, or
No, no, I don't. They sort of have indistinct faces. They have them a lot stronger personalities. So sometimes, like, I would see someone and say, "Ah, that looks like Abike," or "That could be Abike." And that's the main character in my first novel. But it's not as if I had a sort of sketch in my mind, or a sort of like a photographic image of the character. No, I don't.
you touched on your siblings and your upbringing. You all are creative. You have a sister who's a
Huh?
musician. Your
Yes,
brother is a
yes.
writer, producer, and director in Nollywood.
Yes, he's also works in private equity. So that's his day job. So we're all side except for me who's doing it full time now. So my sister who's a singer, songwriter, musician, she's an engineer as well. So that's her day job. Yeah.
High standards.
Niger style.
How have you dealt with the part of your work that means it belongs to the world and the responsibility thereof that has come out of Welcome to Lagos?
No, I guess, I mean, people say all these things, yeah. And I know sometimes, people say, some people feel some sort of great weight responsibility. But I'm like, my own responsibility, like just trying to like eat your 5 a day, drink enough water, sort of meet my own very personal and immediate targets. I just don't really have any extra energy to be worrying about, oh, somebody read my book. And so then, I mean, maybe sometimes if in the immediate aftermath of reading it, perhaps, somebody, like, I met someone somewhere. People can be so rude. I met someone and she was like, I didn't like your book at all. Or that, in fact,
Oh,
by the
wow.
time, I'm telling you, like, by the time I told everybody how I didn't like it, I'm sure I even affected your sales or something like that. And I was like, I was like, okay, oh, okay, but okay, that's your business. um,
But 3 years on,
mhm,
20,000 books sold in the UK. Surely there are people who are picking up Welcome to Lagos for the first time today. It's allowed you book tours, it's allowed you in the last 3 years to keep going, right? The book
mhm,
in 3 years is still going. That in itself, and the conversations you're having, right? You're having conversations with people like the BBC on colonialism, and it didn't end with the book. You didn't just write the book, publish it, and then it ends. I think
mhm.
the book has created so many other conversations for you, and the responsibility thereof, though.
I don't know. I
Or
guess,
you just don't see that, and you're completely like, this exists, and I just need to focus on staying alive.
yeah, it's not just of staying alive. It's I like to eat badun, like I enjoy my life and just
Yeah.
chopping life, belly full. I mean, so like again, responsibility. So I know, like I wrote a piece about Barbados that was about a trip to Barbados I had, and a lot of
Mm.
people in the Caribbean who read it very strongly disagreed with sort of my perceptions of what I'd seen. And sort of came online to call me out for it. And I guess that's what you would say is like the responsibility, like being aware of the reach your words can have, maybe. But the truth is, would I write the piece again? I will write it again, no. And if the people come for me again, I will say, yes, that's your right. Even people, there's a saying that like, let one bird perch and let another bird perch. And any bird that says neither of them should perch, like that bird should die. Or something very drastic like that. But it's like you
Mm.
say your own. I say my
Yeah.
own gra gra. You say your own
Mm.
gra gra. And then that's it now. I mean, I suppose my responsibility is to try as much as possible to articulate my perspective and to try to really try and articulate what I think, which is why a lot of time I don't engage on Twitter. So it's funny, like when a lot of people were coming at me on Twitter, like, so it was a serious barrage. People are abusing me. This girl should stop writing. This is that. I just locked my page and then logged out of my
Mm.
Twitter for like 3 days, because the truth is, like, when you have all that sort of, once you turn off your phone, it doesn't exist, which is why I said, like, my
Mm.
immediate concerns, like drinking water, eating my 5 a day, is more immediate to me than like somebody who disagrees with an article that I wrote on about Barbados. I guess, yes, I'm aware of making sure that like what I've said is what I wanted to say, and then how it's received. There's only so much that I can't do anything about how it's received. You can greet somebody good morning and they'll say you are a stupid person. That's not my responsibility that in your village good morning is an insult.
How have you dealt with the questioning of your age? And I think in company with Chino Achebe, Wale Soyinka, and these are the authors that you are now, or you are placed
Amen.
within,
I
right?
receive it. Yes. Keep going. I receive it. Yes.
How do you deal with, I won't say ageism, right? I think for a long time, especially in literary circles, I think the assumption has always been that with age, comes a perspective in writing. But you've been able to dispel that.
I mean, so like definitely. So my first novel came out when I was 21, still an undergrad,
Mm.
and I didn't find the writing of the novel difficult, or even the editing. What I found difficult was the aftermath. You start going on panels, doing press, television,
Mm.
radio, and hopefully you wouldn't just you'd go there to talk about your book, but if before you know it, people will
Mm.
start asking you about the socio-economic, political, cultural
Mm.
conditions in Nigeria and your projections for the Nigerian economy and all sorts, basically, because you're a Nigerian
Mm.
author. that you suddenly become sort of seen as some like sort of experts on
Mm,
Nigeria. And I mean, at first I did find, and it was often panels, I did find these quite intimidating because I felt like, everybody else could talk and answer the question and like say so much and give so many ideas. And then, somebody would
mm,
ask me a question about like, what do I think about the plight of women in Nigeria and child marriage and FGM? And they'd ask
mm,
me some, I don't know, some question. And I just be like, it's
mm.
bad. And the interviewer will be looking at me like, Ogbeni, this is radio. You can't have silence for radio. You can't just open your mouth and say it's bad. I end.
Yeah,
Yes, I always remember I would leave these interviews always feeling like I hadn't done my best or I hadn't sort of said my ideas to the best of my ability and all that sort of thing. But then, again, it's a function of age. So, like, it's great. Like, and it's because I started young. I'm still young. I'm still under 30, man.
hmm,
I'm still a spring chicken. But, you
yeah,
do
that
this thing
you.
for you do this thing for long enough and it just sort of
Mm.
becomes natural. So, really and truly, if you didn't ask me questions, Zeze, I can't continue talking for this 1 hour on this podcast. I'm telling you, there's somewhere I went. I can, you just, the more you do something, the better it gets at it. So, like, thinking that
Yeah,
the way you are on your day one is the way you be on
yeah.
your day whenever.
I think your honesty and candidness as a person outside of Chibundu, the author, is refreshing. Culturally, especially, we have these very strong relationships or even a dependence to want to be of a certain character that fits in with a brand. And being able to navigate that with the idea that, I am human and I am young and I have written this book. And yes, this book does touch on a whole bunch of other things that, in my mind, I wanted to have as conversation, but doesn't make me an expert. But moving forward, I still want to have other conversations about other topics within my writing, but perhaps now I'm a little bit more comfortable in the fact that that's who I am and how I am in this space. You've been nominated for lots of awards, won some. I guess your reach is growing. Book number 3 has a lot of anticipation. In the meantime, where does everyone find you?
So you can find me on social media actually. So I'm at Chibundu.Onuzo on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Yeah, that's sort of where I am online. But more importantly, what is that? Instagram does not pay the bills. Please go and buy my books. You can find me in Waterstones. Don't come and look for me on social media. I'm not doing anything with your like. um, Welcome to Lagos and the Spider King's Daughter. Yes, those two books. You can find them in the shops. That's the only place you should look for me, to be honest.
Please pick up
Until
a
I learn
copy.
how
It's
to.
anywhere you can get a book, Kindle. Do you have audio versions of the book?
Yes, yes, it's on Audible as well. Yeah.
Audible, anywhere you can find a book, basically. I guess that's the benefit of being published by a publisher. Thank you so much for joining us on this
Oh,
week's
thanks for
episode.
having me.
I've enjoyed your candid expressions, and you've made me laugh way more than I thought. So thank you so much for joining us this week, Chibundu.
You're
Oh,
welcome.
I forgot something. So, on every episode, or I try when I
Mhm.
don't forget, to ask each of my guests how to say their names properly. You kind of have done that already, but it
Mhm.
usually tends to birth a story of how their names are said incorrectly. So, how is your name said properly?
um. So my first name is Chibundu, which means knowing God is life. I have a Yoruba name because my mom is Yoruba, Oluwadara, which means God has done a wonder. I agree. And Onuzo, or Onuzo Chukukama, which means the way of the Lord is best.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I won't try and attempt that. But thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode, Chibundu.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Third Culture Africans, the Lifestyle Podcast. We would love to hear from you. So please find us on Facebook or Instagram at Third Culture Africans and leave us a comment. A review goes a long way in getting our show noticed. So please leave us one if you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time.